There's never really been a scandal like Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
Yes, they're turning the Queen's private home into, the Playboy mansion. It was pretty awful. And in fact, they were like party bags. They were given out by the host. We can only presume the host is Andrew because he was there at his mother's house to give to all the guests. Then, of course, the Epstein files released a whole series of photographs. And one of the photographs was that fateful weekend, the straightforward shooting party weekend. And we can only presume, I suppose, Epstein taking the picture. And can you imagine what the late Queen would have thought? I'm not sure that she'd have been overly impressed.
Well, hello and welcome, Royalists. I am delighted to say that we have another fabulous episode again for you this week with all of our favourite segments: Royal Fashion with Plum, Sykes, Tea with Tom with Paula Froelich, including the breaking news that the Queen likes to dance to ABBA, and Royal Insider, which this week features a sensational interview with Robert Jobson, the legendary royal reporter. For those of you who don't know me, hello, I'm Tom Sykes, and this is The Royalist, your weekly destination for royal scoops and scandal that the British legacy media are too scared to report on. It's been another week of amazing royal news, including what I think is a hugely hypocritical Easter social media blitz by Meghan. But let's get into today's royal rundown. First up, we have Royal Fashion with Plum, and we'll bring you all the highlights of what the royals wore for their big Easter outing weekend, except those who were banned because of Epstein, of course. Plum Sykes reports. Next, Tea with Tom. Paula Froelich joins me to spill all the tea on this week's breaking news, including that Angela Kelly interview with Vanity Fair and the news that Edward and Sophie were forced to check into a very diminished royal home over Easter. And finally, Royal Insider with Robert Jobson. Robert joins me to discuss the fate of ex-Prince Andrew. He has a riveting insight into what the staff at Sandringham had to clear up after one of his sordid parties with Epstein and Maxwell, and he'll be lifting the lid on what the future holds. So, without further ado, let's get into our first segment, Royal Fashion with Plum Sykes. Plum, how are you, and what are you going to tell us about today?
Tommy, I'm really well. I'm really happy to see you. We're going to talk about church dressing, Sunday best, what you wear to church and what the uniform is if you're a royal. And let's remember, pretty much the only people left in the world who need a uniform for church are the royal family. So there's about 6 people who have to get this right. But I'm fascinated by what they were all wearing this Sunday. It was brilliant.
Well, I can tell you, thanks to the notes that you provided to me, that Princess Charlotte and Catherine, Princess Charlotte wore a Catherine Walker bespoke coat, a Tory birch cap toe croc effect, suede ballet flats in cocoa, and a self-portrait blue pleated chiffon dress.
I know. So what I thought was interesting about that photograph, where we've got Princess Catherine in this absolutely beautiful cream jacket dress with a beautiful belt. She's got a beautiful hat on, which is by this woman called Juliet Millinery, stunning. And then you've got Princess Charlotte in this camel-coloured, what we would call an Emily Jane coat in England. It's a very traditional kind of posh kids coat, basically, that they would wear to private schools in London. And it's got the velvet collar and the velvet buttons and the velvet flaps on the pocket, which is the most sort of aristo child's coat that you could buy. Now, the problem that exists now is that most kids of Charlotte's age wear hoodies, anoraks. You can't buy these coats in a shop anymore. So that's why it's Catherine Walker, and that's why it's bespoke. Catherine Walker, Tom, interestingly, was one of the Princess Diana's favorite designers in the 80s and designed lots of coats for her. But what I love about this story is that Princess Catherine is in a pretty run-of-the-mill dress brand, which is self-portrait. Princess Charlotte, her daughter, is in a couture coat, which probably costs 3 times what her mum's wearing, which is brilliant. I love it.
It's a very classy move, isn't it? Put the kids into the posh clothes and you just wear something not quite off the rack, but almost off the rack.
Yeah. And obviously, Princess Catherine is not dressing as, run-of-the-mill normal person going to church on a Sunday. she has got to turn herself out in almost it's the uniform of royals going to church, and it's also the uniform of unity. Because if you look at the pictures of Princess Catherine with Princess Charlotte, they look like they're harmonizing the colors, the tones. And actually, if you look back to previous pictures, Princess Catherine in 2022 and in 2023 with the family, in both of those Easter services, because obviously she didn't go last year because she wasn't very well, um, they're all wearing either pale blue, matching Princess Catherine, or they're wearing like this beautiful royal blue color. And pale blue is a very, very popular color at Easter for the royal family. It's almost like the color that says spring's here, spring's coming, blue skies. But interestingly, she was in cream this time, which I thought looked really, really chic, actually. I mean, obviously, Princess Catherine always looks chic, Tom. I'll never criticize her. You know that.
Absolutely, she did. But the whole family, it was a very interesting tableau. The king and Queen Camilla arrived by car and told that it was quite a cold day, and obviously the king is living with cancer, and they didn't want him to catch a chill, obviously. So he didn't walk to church with the others, but the others all walked to church. It was a sort of real display of unity, because obviously it was quite controversial this year. No Andrew and Sarah, that's goes without saying, but also no Beatrice and Eugenie. We were told that they had asked not to come, and the king had generously agreed to allow them not to come. But it was it felt to me like a very important statement of like, this is the royal family. We are the Windsors, and we are not to be messed with. And it was very interesting. Actually, at the same time, Meghan, of course, who couldn't bear to be overshadowed, started posting pictures from Montecito of them all running around in their pajamas with fake bunny ears on and stuff. Sort of deliberately saying, oh, these are the stiff upper lip, stiff buttoned up, stuffed shirts who pour their kids into suits on Easter Sunday. We're the chilled, cool people who, just have a laugh and wear bare feet and run around the garden. But I mean, looking at those pictures, it didn't actually feel incredibly stuffy. It just felt kind of respectful, I felt.
Yes, I think people love to be able to see that. And they love to see that thing of the unity, we're together, we're smart, we're stable. That's what they want to see. Of course, the royal family is not stable at the moment, but they want to see that. But I also think, Tom, because Beatrice and Eugenie weren't there, and I think they were very sensible, by the way, to take themselves out of it, if that's what happened, it was a new who's who of who's in versus who's out in the royal family. So to me, this was the who's who. Now, I'll tell you who I'm super interested in, and we have to do a royal fashion special on her.
I know who's
Wait for
coming
it.
up.
Are you ready? Okay, you tell me, Tom, who's coming up.
Harriet Sperling.
Yeah. Body of a supermodel. Hair of a supermodel. Okay. So
And about to marry Prince Peter Phillips.
Sorry, yes, exactly. So we've got to say who she's marrying. So Harriet Sperling was Harriet Sanders, and her parents are a posh kind of hunting family from Gloucestershire called Mr. and Mrs. Sanders. Think they live probably quite near Gatcombe, which is where Peter lives. He is the oldest son of Princess Anne. He was previously married to a Canadian girl called Autumn Kelly. She was also married previously to someone sounding very posh. And they got together, they both got children, and it looks like a very beautiful, lovely, romantic love story. She's pretty easy on the eye as well, as is he. And I was very interested to see what she was wearing at this occasion. I also thought it was interesting, Tom, that she was there at all, because he's a minor royal. In fact, he doesn't even use the royal title, does he, as far as I know?
You're correct, he doesn't.
So, in theory, they didn't have to invite Peter Phillips. They didn't have to invite Harriet. But I think that the fact that she was there, the fact that she was dressed so beautifully, she was in the Sunday best uniform, says this girl is going to be part of the firm going forward because she's going to be a great advert for us. So she was wearing this label, which is called Beulah London. Tom, have you heard of it?
Oddly, I have.
Have you?
Yes.
I'm shocked. I thought you were going to say no. So I think I know why you've heard of it, because it's run by one of Princess Catherine's best friends. One of the best friends who runs it, there's two of them. There's one called Lavinia and one called Lady Natasha Rufus Isaacs. Don't you love that name? It's just glorious, isn't it?
You can't do any better. You can't do any better than Lady Natasha Rufus.
You really can't. You really can't. And Lady Natasha Rufus Isaacs is the daughter of the Marquis of Reading. I mean, you've got to love it. And she started this fashion label called Beulah London, which actually is pretty kind of charitable as well in what it does. So socially sustainable, ethical brand.
Yeah.
And but what's interesting is they basically make clothes to wear to Ascot, Cheltenham, and Church, which is obviously great for their friends who are all royals.
Sounds like the perfect label for a member of the royal family.
Well, they all wear it all the time. That's the funny thing.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose church dressing is such a thing, isn't it? Because you've got to look chic and you've got to look cool for the cameras, but it's got to be a little bit traditional and well, it's got to be very traditional and sort of restrained and respectful and all that kind of stuff. But it felt to me like this walk to church on Sunday, on Easter Sunday, it felt to me like they really nailed it. And the royals, I thought it was quite a comforting projection of the royal family, actually, sort of slightly reminiscent of the kind of good old days of Queen Elizabeth.
Yes. And actually, the Queen always used to wear the most fabulous outfits at Easter. She would wear pale blue and carry a bunch of daffodils, or she would wear yellow and she'd have a bunch of tulips, and she'd always have the matching hats and everything. And I think that you're right. You've got to look respectful. None of them really looked cool, but there wasn't any gopping fashion mistakes this time, which I thought was fabulous. And I actually loved Princess Anne's outfit. Tom, have you seen it?
I thought she looked great. I mean, she always looks good, doesn't she?
I mean, she's my new fashion icon. For me, she's emerging as the fashion icon of the royal family, because this coat that she wore, right,
Mm.
which is a sort of, mid blue color, extremely unfashionable shape. You wouldn't see it on any runway in Paris, New York, or London, right? She's worn it for 20 or 30 years. There's a list of all she's worn it to Cheltenham races. She's worn it to Christmas. She's worn it to open factory. She just goes into the back of the closet, brings it out, and actually she's got really, really good clothes and she's looking really good. And she is the epitome of vintage dressing. I mean, she's absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And
Yes.
Princess Anne to me is emerging as this kind of like ironic fashion icon, actually, because she's not planning any fashion or doing anything. She's just pulling it out of the back of her wardrobe. And then what was interesting was that her daughter-in-law to be, Harriet Sperling, is also in a pale blue colour. So I think they had a bit of a word before they went. The Waleses were matching in this kind of cream colours and the dark suits. Princess Anne and her family are matching in this kind of pale blue colour. And then, of course, Camilla is in this incredible red coat, which actually, as the Queen, she should be in crimson, don't you think, Tom?
I thought the King and Queen looked fabulous, and I thought there was this lovely moment at the church door where Charles kind of chucked Princess Charlotte's cheek, and it all looked, I don't know. I thought they just pulled it off really well. It's been a really tough couple of months for the royal family. They've been battered by scandal. They've been battered by the Andrew thing. They've been battered by their own messed up PR, frankly. I thought the whole messaging around Beatrice and Eugenia has been very confusing about whether they are members of the royal family or not members of the royal family. And I think that what we saw on Easter Sunday was that the royal family can actually, when it matters, they can come together and they can put on that show of force and that show of unity. And I think that they did a brilliant job.
Yeah, me too. And I think setting that example of saying, we're going to put our worries aside, we're going to put our cares aside, because Easter Sunday is an important day, obviously, for Christians all around the world and for all sorts of people. And it's nice to say, we're going to put that aside and enjoy being a family for once.
There's also some news coming out of the commercial arm of the royal family that there is some sensational new royal wallpaper available that you've spotted. Tell us all
Yeah,
about
so
it.
Tom, I was doing my usual sort of Sunday evening browse through wallpaper websites, as one does. And what should I come upon but a collab between Sanderson, which is a very old English wallpaper company, and the Royal Collection and Highgrove. So the King has put out a wallpaper with Sanderson, which is a toile de Jouy, which, as you know, Tom, is a kind of French country scene. But guess what's in the country scene on the wallpaper?
Peacocks?
His garden at Highgrove. So if you are a huge fan of the royal family, go along to Sanderson, click on wallpaper, Highgrove, and you can buy the Highgrove toile de Jouy, cover your, beautiful American living room in it. Feel like you're at Highgrove every day of the week.
Do you know, I am a fan of the royal family, but I'm not sure I'm quite mad enough to wallpaper my house with the inside of King Charles's garden. But well spotted, Plum, and thank you for bringing this exciting royal merch opportunity to the attention of the Royalists. Plum Sykes, thank you so much. Obviously, regular fans will know that Plum Sykes is a contributing editor at American Vogue. She's also the author of the sensational Substack PS by Plum Sykes. You can see the QR code on your screen right now. I advise you to sign up for a subscription. Plum, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Tommy. That was really good fun.
Okay, and now let's get into Tea with Tom. Now it's time for Tea with Tom with my old friend Paula Froelich, where we pick through the week's hottest royal gossip. Well, there's a huge amount of stuff we could talk about today, Paula. There's the fact that the Queen liked dancing to ABBA with Angela Kelly. I did enjoy that story. There's the ongoing Beatrice and Eugenie situation. But the story that I really wanted to ask you about was that Prince Edward reportedly had to stay in a royal Airbnb this Easter. Tell us what happened.
Okay, Tom, this is so funny to me. So apparently, Prince Edward loves to spend Easter with his wife Sophie and their kids at his father's old place, Wood Farm. Every year he's done it ever since Prince Philip died, and he loves it, and the family loves it. Unfortunately, it has a bit of an intruder this year. His name is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. So, as you and I have been talking, Andrew is supposed to move into Marsh Farm. It's not quite ready yet. To be fair, I doubt it will ever be ready for Andrew, but he's splitting his time between Marsh Farm and Wood Farm, and of course, the RV out back, which I think is hilarious. Anyway, so of course, Edward's like, hello, I need you out. Our family's coming. And Andrew's like, absolutely not. I've got nowhere to go. Nope, Marsh Farm's not ready yet. So, of course, Edward's like, oh, God. And he can't be seen with his brother. He probably doesn't want to hang out with his brother. So Sophie, and the kids had to rent another place in Sandringham for Easter. Now, we also know that Edward had a word with Andrew privately because, of course, no one wants their family anywhere near Andrew. And so he went over, marched over, and I can only imagine what went on, but marched over, rapped on the door, and was like, Andrew, this will not stand. They had words, but still, he did not get Wood Farm back.
Yes, so an amazing and intriguing game of royal Monopoly taking place on the Sandringham estate. So Edward and Famille were forced to rent. If you're watching on video, you might be seeing some pictures on your screen now of the Gardens Cottage, which is advertised on numerous rental platforms. It's not actually on Airbnb, which is a shame, because otherwise we could call it Royal Airbnb. But, it's on other ones. There's one called Oliver's Travels that it's on. All these, generic middleman travel agencies. And so, of course, channeling my inner Daily Mail journalist, I decided to see if I could immediately book it to go there for 4 days. And I could have done an amusing story, Paula, where I go, as I stepped into Prince Edward's bed, made myself a cup of tea or what have you. But I confidently predict that it will be booked back to back by journalists from the Daily Mail fairly soon, writing long features about what it's like to sleep in Prince Edward's bed. Although I was slightly put off because when I read the small print, it said no commercial activity allowed. So I couldn't have done my podcast from it, which would have really been the only reason for doing it.
Tom, I would have flown over for that. But also, the other thing is, how much did he rent it for? Was it a peppercorn? Not unlike his own estate that he rents? I can't imagine that, they would actually be like, hello, Edward, here's the bill. Unless it, of course, said a peppercorn.
But this is the thing that's so weird, right? This house is like 400 meters from Sandringham House, and they're renting it out for £1,000 a night, right? Which after you've paid the VAT and you've paid the cleaners and you've paid someone to clean the sheets and cut the grass, I mean, look, frankly, isn't really worth it. Do you know what I mean? And you're just like, they're so incredibly cheap for a family.
Well, the other thing is, frankly, Tom, Bagshot Park, where Edward lives, is huge. It is gorgeous. It is. Why would you want to leave and go stay at Sandringham, far away, at some place for a lot of money, even though, again, I think it was a peppercorn. But I get it if it's sentimental for your father, if you want to go and reminisce and, have just a nice quiet time. However, if it's now been bestained with Andrew and his lumpy fingers, no thank you. And if he's still there not getting out, stay at Bagshot Park. It is gorgeous. I'm sure you've got photos of it. We would all like to stay there.
Yes, well, of course, with 130 rooms, Prince Edward and Sophie's home have, they could have easily thrown a small party there, one would suspect.
Not only that, Tom, but with 130 rooms, they don't visit them all. Okay? So why not go to the wing you never use and just see it with bright eyes and pretend you're somewhere else?
So the other amazing story this week was an interview by Katie Nicholl, fresh from her exhilarating court performance in the media trial of the century against Prince Harry, has got the long sought after interview with Angela Kelly. I mean, insanely jealous of Katie, and I've sent her an email congratulating her, and we're going to try and get her on the show at some point over the next few days to talk in more depth about it. Katie kind of alludes in the piece to Angela Kelly being there at the Queen's deathbed, which I've always been told that Angela was there when the Queen drew her last breath with Princess Anne. But it really struck me that in a lot of these books that have come out lately about, because it's the Queen's 100th birthday, Angela Kelly's role is being like massively written out of the Queen's final days. And I think it's incredibly disrespectful, actually, because I think that the Queen wanted Angela Kelly there because Angela Kelly was her oldest friend. And there's this amazing anecdote that Katie Nicholl has about when Terry Wogan, which this British radio show would come on, he'd start every day with Dancing Queen. And the Queen and Angela Kelly would dance around the room singing Dancing Queen. I mean, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous image, isn't it?
It is. And to be fair, Tom, I think it's quite elitist and classist that Angela is being written out because, here was this daughter of a Liverpudlian dock worker who became best friends with the Queen. That in and of itself is an amazing story. But also, she was never one of the elite. Also, remember, after the Queen died, Charles kind of paid her off. The Queen had given her lifetime residency in a house, and Charles kind of paid her off, and she went back to Sheffield, where she had originally lived. So I'm not sure that other people loved her as much. Was it jealousy? Probably. Charles never was as close to his mother as Angela was. Was it elitism and classism? Absolutely.
Yeah, and of course, Angela was basically the gatekeeper to the Queen. So during the final, and especially, we obviously very famously, in fact, Robert Jobson, one of our guests on the Royalist, told the story in one of his other books. What Meghan wants, Meghan gets. The row about the tiara. Angela Kelly wouldn't allow the tiara to just be willy-nilly ordered up for a hairdresser rehearsal, etc., etc., etc. But the reason that they all resented Angela so much is exactly what you say, because she was so close and they couldn't understand how this, frankly, working class girl from Liverpool had become best friends with the Queen, and they were jealous. They were jealous of her. They were jealous of her role, uh, of her closeness to the Queen, and they were fearful of her role as the gatekeeper to the Queen. Angela Kelly spent the final years of her life with the Queen, and I'm told was pretty horrified, and made no bones about letting people know that she felt they didn't visit their mother and grandmother enough, I'm told.
Well, they didn't, frankly. I mean, you and I have talked about what happened on the Queen's deathbed. People had to be called in when they knew she was very ill. People who went mushroom picking instead of staying by the bedside, whatnot. But the other thing is she had a great sense of humor, and she did not wield her role like a cudgel. She did not come out and threaten people. She did not do all these things that other people might have felt because they knew how close she was to the Queen. For example, we talk about Tiara Gate, where Harriet and Meghan wanted the tiara, and it was the Queen Mary tiara, the bandeau, beautiful, millions and millions of dollars worth. And everyone has agreed, great, Meghan will get this tiara. However, then Meghan wants to practice with the tiara and have her hairdresser come over and just keep practicing how it would look and all this other stuff. And the Queen had always said, no, this is not a toy. This is something that is very valuable. We do not just take it out of the vault willy-nilly. It was up to Angela to try to prance about it and say, never giving up the Queen. However, finally, Harry has a real row with Angela, and that's again when what Meghan wants, Meghan gets is screamed at. And Angela, in tears, goes to the Queen and says, I can't take any more of this. And this is after many, many battles. This was not her first go round. And she had had enough and said, I can't take this anymore. And the Queen said, that's fine, I've got it. But the other issue was nobody could understand why Meghan needed the tiara so many times, or any time really, because Catherine, during the lead up to her wedding, also needed a hairdresser to see how her tiara would look and used a plastic toy one.
Yes, an absolutely fascinating history.
I actually hope that she is involved in some way because they have tried to cut her out of the Queen's memory and the Queen's royal life. I really wonder if they're going to allow her to be a part of the celebration.
It is incredibly notable, though, when you read a lot of these books, that a lot of them just really, really gloss over the fact that she went up to Balmoral with her for the last. She was there for she was at Windsor with her all throughout COVID. She was the person. She went up to Balmoral with her in the summer when she didn't come back, and she was there at her deathbed with Princess Anne. And all you ever read is that it was Princess Anne was there, but Angela was there. So.
Yep.
That's all I have to say. Paula, thank you very much for coming on the Royalist.
You can also catch me on News Nation Wednesday through Sunday mornings. And my YouTube is at Paula Froelich. Thanks, guys.
And lastly, we're going to get into our final segment, Royal Insider. Well, folks, we have brought you a succession of fantastic interviews here on the Royalist. We've brought you Andrew Lowney, we've brought you Tom Bower, we've brought you Matt Donnelly from Variety, and I'm absolutely thrilled to say that joining us today, we have one of Fleet Street's finest, one of the legendary royal journalists of all time, Robert Jobson, nicknamed the godfather of royal reporting by the Wall Street Journal. Robert is the author of so many royal books, you'd struggle to enumerate them all, but the latest is The Windsor Legacy. Robert, what's the book about, and why did you want to write this book?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for having me on. Look, I really wanted to write this book. I've always been interested in history as a history graduate. Ever since I got involved in covering the royals, it's almost like been having a ringside seat to history. And I realized that I've been, out of the last 100 years, I've been covering it for 35 years. So what I know and what I've seen myself and photographed and written about is now actually history. And you have to be. I talk to people that are 35, 40, and they have no recollection of Princess Diana and things like this. It always, it always blends into one when you actually, it's in your memory and not in somebody else's. So I thought that it was some book. I was doing some lectures, and people were generally interested in, say, the last 100 years. Since it's coming up, isn't it? To the 100th anniversary of the Queen's birth, the late Queen's birth, and I thought that was a perfect time to re-examine the Windsors, the Windsor legacy, how really we from her birth onwards the monarchy has survived scandals and it's had to reinvent itself to survive, really. And now I think we're probably at this moment in time, with everything that's going on, Harry and Meghan, the Andrew Mountbatten Windsor scandal, Epstein, a 1917 moment when, of course, when George V decided to change the name of the monarchy from Sykes, the dynasty from Sykes Coburg Gotha to Windsor. So that was the real reason behind it, and it divides itself up into sort of chunks. So when I'm doing lectures, it's quite interesting. You need to do a 5-part lecture series that you can divide it up in that way and talk about the history, the abdication, and come all the way through to the present day.
Yeah, and Robert is an absolute scholar, and the book is so readable. It's like this fantastic sort of romp through 100 years of history. Of course, as you say, the subtitle of the book refers to scandal, and there's never really been a scandal like Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, has there, Robert? And you have a sensational revelation in your book about some particularly unpleasant things that the staff at Sandringham had to clear up after that famous straightforward shooting weekend. Will you tell us that story, please, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, of course, Andrew described Emily Maitlis in that dreadful interview that he had a straightforward shooting weekend for Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, it wasn't. It was far from straightforward, and the staff were appalled by what they actually had to be involved with and witness. But apart from when I first wrote the book, I was told by the source that actually they were appalled at having to clear up all these things that were distributed amongst the guests. They were included, sex drugs like poppers and condoms and lube and all this sort of stuff, which wasn't really the sort of thing they expected to be dealing with in the palace staff 2 weeks before all the royals descended on them for Christmas, when the Queen would be turning up. But it was actually worse than that. It lately transpired. It was that actually they were like party bags. They were given out by the host. We can only presume the host is Andrew, because he was there at his mother's house, to give to all the guests. So this was a little surprise as they arrived. Yes, they're turning the Sandringham, the Queen's late Queen, the Queen's private home, into like the Playboy mansion. It was pretty awful. And in fact, that story, when the book was serialized in the Daily Mail, sort of didn't get much traction. It's quite, it's typical to read over your breakfast table, I suppose. But then, of course, the Epstein files released a whole series of photographs. And one of the photographs was that fateful weekend, the straightforward shooting party weekend, where he's laid across all those women that were black, their faces were redacted, with Ghislaine Maxwell in the background lurking, who's now in prison, of course. And we can only presume, I suppose, Epstein taking the picture. But look, it was, I mean, quite shocking, I think, from the staff. They're not easily shocked that much, but I think they were more appalled by the whole what was going on more than anything. And can you imagine what the late Queen would have thought? I'm not sure that she'd have been overly impressed.
In terms of the late Queen Elizabeth, who, as you say, her 100th birthday coming up later this month, and King Charles, what is your belief? What did they know about Andrew, and when did they know it? In fact, let's start with Charles. What did he know, and when did he know it? And how involved was he in the payoff that silenced Virginia Giuffre?
It's a very big question. I mean, I can only tell what I know, and what I know is that several, maybe a couple of years after, when it was getting very serious in terms of about 2013, 2014. I know that the King and the then Prince of Wales, but the King now, and Andrew had a conversation in which he gave guarantees that he had not been involved in, I'll quote him, anything untoward. Um, and Charles, who, had his own issues going on, not with the Jimmy Savile inquiry had left him exposed, and Bishop Ball that was going on at the time. No, the reality is he took him at his word, and it's an astonishing thing that he gave his word, Andrew, given that he knew full well that he lied, because that later came out, and that he knew full well that Sarah Ferguson had gone to see Epstein after he'd come out of prison. So that there's that was obviously that the King then, is Prince of Wales as he was told this. Now I'm sure that the similar thing was told to Her late Majesty, and she obviously believed that her son was telling the truth. We're probably never going to get to the end of to the bottom of this Andrew saga, but the fact is, Virginia Giuffre Roberts went away and wrote her story is incredibly tragic. She went away and wrote prepared to write this book. Some of her story doesn't add up factually, though. I think that, but she can be forgiven in terms of the fact that memory does fade, but some of it doesn't quite add up, and judges have thrown that out of being accepted as evidence. But at the same time, this is a tragic tale of a woman that ended up killing herself. And although Andrew may never be charged with anything to do with the sex side of things and the sexual ring that was going on and what was going on, and it all sounds incredibly awful. The reality is, his reputation is tarnished forever because he clearly lied. I mean, and you've got to have some sympathy for the King if he's been lied to by his brother. But pretty soon after, he wasn't the boss then, the boss was the Queen, and she had the final say. And although he would have probably been arguing for a bit more, stronger action towards the end of the Queen's life, she didn't really take that action. Now, as to the money, the Sun have written on the record that he'd paid, I think it was some of $2 million out of the 12 million. I mean, that's the bottom line here, Tom, is that's clearly hush money. Whatever way you look at it, they didn't want the scandal erupting during the Queen's Jubilee year, and what ended up as actually being the year in which he died. But that was only going to keep it at arm's length for a short while. But does anybody pay 12 million pounds or dollars? We're not sure what. Anybody pay that amount of money to someone they claim they don't know? I mean, it's preposterous.
Robert, the message coming out of the Buckingham Palace since King Charles acceded to the throne has largely been, and it's been done anonymously and it's been done off the record, that this was basically all the Queen's fault, that she left an unexploded bomb under Charles's throne. Do you buy that, or is this just a tactical thing to preserve the King?
Well, I think what we're witnessing here is, everybody protect the King. If you see it in the battles from Richard III onwards, protect the King. The Praetorian Guard are going around him. Like, I remember being on a flight with him actually flying to on a private jet out of New Zealand to one of the islands in the Pacific for a visit, and at that time that the interview was just going on. I think the King had been up all night dealing with all sorts of things, was dealing with it even on the plane. So he was, I'm sure, very stressed about it. But the fact is, he would have been taking a bit of a lead on this, because the greatest respect to his mother at that stage, she was well into, she was into 90 years old, and probably, and blinded by a love for her son, whereas Charles probably had a more clear view of what was going on. I do believe that had a lot more knowledge than we're ever going to say. It's easy to blame, isn't it, somebody who's dead? I think it's slightly unfair, because a lot of the other big decisions were being made. Really, essentially, she was passing them down the line to Charles, particularly after the Duke of Edinburgh died. She was passing things down to Charles. So my view is, that may well be the line to protect the monarchy, but if money has passed hands from the King when he was Prince of Wales, in whatever format, a charitable donation, I don't know, it becomes murkier, because remember, Nixon wasn't involved in the Watergate break-in, but he was involved in the cover-up.
Yes, a very relevant parallel, of course, for our American listeners, that the cover up can become worse than the crime. And you mentioned, of course, the Queen being blinded by love for her son. But I know one of the last non family members to spend a considerable amount of time with her. And before they went in to see her, Donald McCann, who you will remember, Robert, warned this person she can't see very well. She can't really hear. She certainly can't move, as we all know. And she can drop in and out a bit of the present and into the past. But she was an elderly lady.
That's exactly right. I mean, she could bear. I remember being told, and it's rather a sad image, really, that she was used to get frustrated when the servants brought in a large pot of tea because she couldn't lift the teapot to pour her own tea, and she dropped it, and there's things like that. She'd say, I told them," it would frustrate her, but she would be, of course, her concentration was pretty damn good for a lady of her age, but at the same time, it was a very difficult thing. I mean, I wrote the story that she was going to asked Andrew to accompany her into the ceremony to celebrate the life of the Duke of Edinburgh, and that was seen as a big moment for him. And she was doing things like paying for him to have all these massages and gurus come to Royal Lodge. She was certainly blinded by love for him, but there was one instance I do know that when she initially was going to have been told by her aides that she had to strip Andrew of the first round of I always liken it to the sort of Mary Poppins scene when they're punching through the hat and taking off the, but when he's the first round of stripping him of all his the titles and things, that she wanted to do it alone to say quietly to him to have done mother to son. But they wouldn't allow the two there. I think it was Edward Young and one other were in the room. So no, we have to be in the room with you when this happens, and they wouldn't allow that to happen. And that was really blindsided Andrew. He was going for tea with his mother. The next thing you know, there was these two sort of palace henchmen, if you like, there, spelling out what exactly was going to happen because, it had serious implications. And those implications of, I think that since the king became king, he's acted fairly swiftly, actually, in terms of what he's had to do. But I still argue, and I'm sure the victims of these crimes, which still, there's only been it's a crimes against young girls, and at the moment we only have one woman who's actually in prison. It does seem rather bizarre to me and wrong, but the fact is that she, the Queen was very, very conscious of not basically suggesting he was guilty by taking these things away too soon. Now, what Charles has done effectively has been very, draconian, kicking him out of his house, removing him of all final privileges. He's even taken away his birthright of being born a prince, although technically he can't. But I mean, that's essentially what he's done.
Robert, there are so many revelations in this book. You touched briefly on Jimmy Savile and Peter Ball, Laurence van der Post. You also have a fantastic story about Queen Camilla mocking Kate's cancer recovery video, saying it was a bit like a shampoo commercial. You have a fantastic.
I mean, I don't think that she meant it as a sort of brutal takedown, but it is
right.
Very much Camilla's sense of humour. And
you mustn't interrupt me, Robert, because I need to get through the list of all the scoops for our readers. Otherwise, we won't get, because we're not going to get time to talk about all of them. So yeah, we have Camilla saying that Kate's cancer bid is like a shampoo commercial, in jest, I hasten to add. We have the Queen throwing a newspaper to the floor in rage about Harry and Meghan using the name Lilibet. We have this fantastic picture of a dysfunctional court, a lack of discipline, perhaps. And I just found it such a fascinating read and such an incredible portrait of the court of King Charles. I also loved all your revelations about the conflict between William and Charles, which is something I'm really interested in and have written about a lot. I had a fantastic story earlier this year that Charles apparently got very annoyed with William because he said he didn't want to go to the Pope's funeral because there was an Aston Villa game on. I mean, anyway, it was eventually prevailed upon to go to the funeral of the Pontiff. But what is the relationship like between not between William and Charles personally, but between their courts, because it seems very, very fractious. It seems like there's been a big disagreement about how to deal with Andrew, and the disagreement about how to deal with Harry is played out in front of our eyes every time Harry comes to London. William suddenly seems to have a pressing engagement at the other end of the country.
I think there is a working relationship, but I think that, there's a sense, it was put to me the other day, that maybe that William's team, on William maybe personally himself, are not as deferential to the monarch as, say, the king was to the late queen, as as Charles was to the late queen. And they're a bit too loud in talking about what they're going to do when William is king. There's been a lot of briefing going on there to certain on-side journalists, and I think they find that a little bit disrespectful. Um, there was a story that is in the book about when Charles was Prince of Wales, but it was during COVID or just after COVID, and William wanted to see if he could piggyback the blue lights, the motorbike thing, and Charles, he's a very kind man, said, yeah, of course, no problem with that whatsoever. But then they were late coming out, William and Catherine, and so I think Camilla urged the car to go, and of course they're on the steps, and off it went. And I think that sort of just about sums up a slight little friction between them. There's certain issues, William didn't want to wear a kilt, for example, doesn't want to wear a kilt. And the reason Charles urges him to wear a kilt is because it's a whole industry in Scotland, the Highlands, in the tweed and making the kilt. So there's certain things he doesn't want to do. He was a little late for the coronation, apparently, because he was sorting some stuff out from social media. But there are, they've got different priorities. But I still think that there is a loving relationship, but it hasn't when it comes to Harry yet. I mean, as a dad, you will probably. He's got a difficult one. His ex-wife's not overly keen on Harry, and nor is his other son. So when inviting him in, it's literally going to be Charles and his son, and he doesn't overly trust him either. So, I think it's a difficult with Harry, and I can't see that reconciliation happening. But still, my favourite story in the whole book was with Camilla's, when her jewels went missing from Beaconsfield service station, where I got told this, and the two of the staff went off for a coffee, and the other one went off for a cigarette. And then this opportunist band of thieves nicked the bag of jewels, which were going to be taken on the plane from RAF Norfolk with the Queen for a tour when she was Duchess of Cornwall. And of course, they didn't want it to be leaked to the police because, of course, it would come out in the press. So they got the intelligence services involved, and they did a deal to get the jewelry back so no charges were ever brought, which was it's almost like a scene out of one of those sort of old-fashioned carry-on movies or something.
It is a fantastic story, that, about the jewels. I have so many questions about it that I'd love to ask you off the record, Robert.
Yeah.
But there's also, I mean, as I was saying, there's so many scoops in this book. Robert confirms that there is been a plan, maybe for Camilla to take Royal Lodge. That's one of the revelations that he has in there. Also, one thing I was, of course, there's the story about the art coming off the walls of the staff bedroom, which would be interesting. Maybe you could tell us about that in a bit if we have time. Basically, there's all these magnificent works of art in all the staff bedrooms, and just pictures of horses everywhere else. So Charles kind of switched them around when he came.
I think he was quite worried, Tom, that there were all these magnificent pieces of art in the staff bedrooms, and then I think he was quite shocked, I think, when he saw it and started to say, well, this is going to stop, just in case they sort of found their way, out of the staff bedrooms. But
Yes, exactly. But I really want to ask you a bit about, because now Robert is one of Robert's most legendary scoops at the Evening Standard. I actually worked at the Evening Standard myself, Robert, but not at the same time as you. But Robert had this incredible scoop in the Evening Standard that Charles and Camilla were getting married. He was the person who broke that story. It's one of the most famous, as Robert was saying, ringside at history stories of all time. And what I wanted, and Robert has excellent sources in the court of King Charles and Camilla. He is the expert on it. What I wanted to ask you, Robert, was when it comes to Harry, it seems to me like the king instinctively wants to conciliate, he wants to reconcile. But are you saying you don't believe that can happen? And is William the block to that? Because we know William feels very differently.
Yeah, I think that William is the blocker, but I also think Camilla's not overly keen on having, given what she's been accused of in the spare. I think the problem, Tom, is all about trust. It's not love. It's not a question of love. He loves his children equally, but it's trust. He doesn't really know his grandchildren on the Sussex side, which is rather sad. And he would feel sad about that. I've no doubt about that. But, he's got to wear two hats. One of them is a crown, and he has to look to the future of the monarchy first. And it involves having tough decisions and tough love. Harry can't expect to absolutely annihilate his family the way he did, and then at the same time be welcomed back after they've apologized to him. He seems to have got it completely out of kilter. I'm not even sure an apology would suit William. Look what happened to William after all this happened. The stress was undoubtedly, a lot of things were said about Catherine totally unfairly. I mean, she was completely caught in the crossfire in all of this. She ended up having a cancer scare. The king starts getting his cancer scare. They've sort of moved on from the Harry dramas, and Harry's still behaving like he's a sort of teenager in terms of the drama he creates whenever he's in town. I revealed in the book how the king, there was a procedure that was, an aide came into the room 20 minutes after the meeting had started, just so they could get away, because he didn't want to get involved in all of the stuff about, it's too stressful for a man who was living with cancer. And so I just think Harry has had a great opportunity. He was always very close to his father. And I do believe that somehow that's a real sadness, really, that is not going. It's been a little bit resolved, but it's not going to be properly resolved. And the other thing is with his brother, who, what's his brother supposedly done? Just said, be careful, are you sure she's the right girl for you? Probably nothing much more than that. And it's been taken into this huge war between the two. And I just don't see that one resolving itself.
You sort of touched on it there, Robert, maybe a bit diplomatically. But what I would say is, I would say that friends and people around William will tell you quite clearly that they believe that Catherine's cancer was at the very least made worse, or the whole situation was aggravated by the stress around Harry. But what I'm told is that William and Catherine don't say that directly to other people. And I'm told a similar thing with the king, that the king would never dream of saying, oh, well, the stress from Harry, made this worse or brought it on or anything like that. But that Camilla definitely feels that Harry has not acted as well as he could to his father, given the health conditions that his father is living with. Would you say that's
Yeah,
fair?
I think Camilla is a bit in the role of the Duke of Edinburgh to the Queen. She's his protector, and I think she probably thinks that deep down the King's heart is he wears his heart on his sleeve, and he may be a bit too soft. I mean, she is somebody I think is there to protect the King and loves the King and will not allow anybody to sort of take advantage of the King, not even William. So I think that also you've got to remember when these two diagnoses came through, it meant the absence of a huge star, the jewel in the crown in Catherine, who's not seen for many months. And of course, the king had to step right back and eat his spinach soups and things or whatever and stay out of the scene. So it was really left to Camilla and William to lead the charge. William wanted to do a lot less. His father said, like, please carry on doing as much as you can. But Camilla did rise to the challenge. So a lot of it fell on this woman who was called the Rottweiler, who was called the person who ruined the monarchy for quite a period of time, about 3 or 4 months, really lent on her. And so I think she felt that she earned her stripes in those 3 months and earned her right to speak her mind.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, Robert, do you think that the king is a poor judge of character? Or do you think he can be hasty in his judgment of character? Do you think he can be a bit weak? Do you think he risks being seen as weak sometimes by the decisions that he makes?
Well, it's hard being the king. I think that people forget that when you're being the king, you're also protected, and your people around you, you have to rely on them telling you the truth. They don't always tell the truth in the right way. People aren't always blunt to him because maybe they don't want to lose their position or their job. And so he's got to rely on their honesty, and it's not always there. People always got their own agendas. But I think he was a poor judge of character when it came to Bishop Ball. He was a poor judge of character when it came to Jimmy Savile, who, in the book I describe some of the things that Jimmy Savile used to get up to. He would turn up in his tracksuit, and with a bow tie when it was a black tie too. And he's just an odd character anyway. And people would, towards that time, when Charles was asking him to sort of almost take over his communications department, people knew that this guy was a wrong un. They knew it in the BBC. People knew about it. I think that his judgment has been flawed on a number of occasions, but he can only be as good as the people that advise as well. And it's sometimes that he says that he has a lot of people around him that pay a lot of money towards his charities, and on occasion that's been seen as very poorly judged. I mean, but he knows that because a lot of these people we used to describe as the Bond villains. So he's not really knows they weren't all they were more sinners than saints, I think.
Yes, of course. The odd €250,000 in a Fortnum's bag. Well, that happens to all of
At
us,
least
doesn't
it was
Robert?
a Fortnum's bag, yeah.
At least, exactly. No, you do make this point that he was warned repeatedly, I think are the words used in the book, about Savile, but chose to go ahead with it anyway. Robert, can I ask you the big question, of course? Underpinning everything that's going on in the royal family at the moment, and it's hard to understand, I think, if you just read the British newspapers, because obviously, because of the Press Regulation Commission, they can't talk about the King's health. Like, even if you knew for a fact exactly what cancer the King had, what his prognosis was, how long he was going to live, in the UK newspapers, you cannot report it. It's the law, it's the guidelines, it's the code. It's not a great conspiracy or anything like that. It's the law. But we are not subject to those same regulations. We're in America, and we can talk a little more candidly about it, and of course, try to be respectful about it. How sick do you think the king is, and what do you think in your head the people around him think the kind of time frame is? I mean, we saw this very encouraging news at the beginning of the year where he said he was doing much better, he could reduce his cancer treatment, but we've all had friends, we've all had family who fought the terrible disease, and we know that things can come out of the blue with cancer, can't they?
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of development in modern science that he'll be getting the best treatment possible. I think the only way you can describe this, Tom, and although we're in America with you, I'm in the moment in Reading in Berkshire, not that far from Windsor Castle. So if someone barges in, then you know what it's about. I would say that we have to accept that this is a man, despite what was said. I think it was overhyped in December. I think that the palace were over emphasizing the good news, and even the press people were saying, "Oh, this is good news." They were trying to say to the journalists at the time, don't interpret it any other way. This is good news. Our king is living with cancer. He will live with cancer. He's not any prospect, I think, of anything other than living with cancer, and that's probably says it all, really.
And I think let's put it on the record that he's been a tremendous inspiration. He's been incredibly brave, incredibly courageous, showing up for those things. I know somebody who was with him recently at midnight, or he'd been up all day at an event, and wanted to stay on afterwards and talk to everybody, and stayed in the theatre for a good 40 minutes afterwards.
No, he's an incredible man. I mean, Tom, what he's going through and what he's doing, I've seen it at events, stood not that far from him, and he's almost falling asleep and standing up. And this is the man who believes wholeheartedly in his duty and his courage, and he's a courageous man. But I would say this: I think that if he felt that he could not carry out his duty because of ill health, and he felt that his health was in any way affecting his position, then he would actually not necessarily look to stand down, but he would probably say, I can't continue with the treatment I've got, and I'll let him take his action, because I know that he does alternate his treatments. So he'll probably be doing the same ahead of this Washington visit, to make sure he's got enough energy to give it his best shot. And that's what he's about, really. He knows he's a man in his late 70s. He knows that nobody lives forever. But luckily modern science has given us, medical science has given us a chance to live longer than, say, his grandfather who died of cancer in 56, and his great grandfather who died of cancer, I think was 70. So, at this moment in time, he's given it his best shot. And we learned, of course, didn't we, that for the best part of several years at the end of his life, Prince Philip was living with cancer. But there's a difference between living with cancer and you're sort of pretty much retired, to actually still being the monarch and doing the job and doing what is expected of you.
Yes, indeed. Well, Robert, thank you so much for coming on The Royalist. We are absolutely honoured and thrilled to have you, keeping up our run of absolutely stellar guests. So we're just delighted to have you. Robert's excitingly joined Substack, and his Substack is absolutely brilliant. Please do check it out. You'll see a QR code on your screen right now. You can scan that. If you're driving and listening to this on the audio platforms on Acast or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, then just maybe tell your personal digital assistant, who we won't name in case it drives your phone crazy, to find Robert Jobson on Substack. Robert very generously offered free subscriptions to the first 250 people. And I'm glad to say that I availed of one, Robert, but I've given you a free one back to mine. So we're even.
Yeah, I'm very cut. I've upped it to 500 because what I'm doing at the moment on it is looking back over a 35-year career, and in that time took lots of snaps of things that other people would have seen from behind the scenes, as well as tell the story. And I think that's quite fun. It's been an enjoyable journey, just chasing some of these photographs, which of course weren't quite as digital in the early days.
Great. Well, you heard it here first. Snap that QR code, people, and join Robert's Substack free if you get there quick enough. I'd say those 500 spots will be gone really soon. Robert Jobson, author of The Windsor Legacy, thank you so much for joining The Royalist.
Thanks, Tom. Real pleasure.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I thought that was one of the best episodes we've done so far. What was your favourite bit? I was very struck by Robert Jobson's interview. I thought that revelation about Sandringham was absolutely phenomenal. I thought his insights into the king, his relationship with William, the stuff about Camilla. I mean, that guy just has it all. I'd love to sit down for a pint with him and get it all out of him off the record. Let me know what your favourite bits were. Please let me know in the comments below. A really huge thank you to my incredible guests, to Plum, Sykes, to Paula Froelich, and of course to the star of today's show, Robert Jobson. Thank you for being with us, guys. Robert, Plum, Paula, and I are all on Substack, which is a subscription newsletter service. You can find us there by scanning the QR code that's on your screen now, or else just search for Tom Sykes, The Royalist on Substack, and it should come up pretty quick. Please, if you would like to show your support, please do please do subscribe. And if you're feeling really generous, share this podcast with someone that you might think would enjoy it, because it all helps to keep the oil lamps flickering here at Royalist Towers. So we're so grateful to have your support. We don't take it lightly. We know that it's an hour of your valuable time, and we're incredibly grateful to you for spending it with us. Thanks so much, and we hope we'll see you again next week. And an extra special thank you to our producer, Rachel Passer. Thanks, Rachel.